Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday session with HGP, the Humanists of Greater Portland. My name is Anand Atre, and it is my pleasure and privilege to be your MC for today's event, which is being recorded. HGP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but the views expressed by myself, our reader, today's speaker, HGP members, and our guests at today's meeting are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland. For those who are new to humanism or HGP, humanism represents a progressive way of thinking that is informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. A humanistic approach to life is grounded in reason and our shared humanity, making a humanistic lifestyle one that aligns with social and planetary responsibility. Humanistic values are not based on appeals to external deities. Instead, they are formed when humans use reason and reflect with empathy on our experiences, collective needs, and capacity for flourishing. Paramount among these values is the commitment to uphold the dignity of all human beings. Now, without further ado, let me turn the proceedings over to our reader for this week, our peerless president, Ann Henderson.
Fearless.
Wow.
Peerless and fearless.
I don't know. Fearless, I'm maybe not. Okay. This was written in 1939, sorry, by Charlie Chaplin for the movie The Great Dictator. I'm sure you've heard it, but I'm going to read it. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone, if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there is room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives us abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost. The airplane and the radio have brought us together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourself to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate. Only the unloved hate. The unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery. Fight for liberty. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then, in the name of democracy, Let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators fight for themselves, free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite.
It is now my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today's session. Given the numerous times he has already presented to HGP, he really doesn't require a lengthy introduction. He's a Professor Emeritus at the University of Washington, an internationally noted ornithologist and ecologist, and is a favorite speaker and a gift to HGP. Now in his 90s, he has a continued passion for the life of the mind. Throughout his career, he served the advancement of science through leadership in professional organizations and university programs, devoting much effort to the connection between science and public policy. Today's presentation, titled Insights from a War, will address some of the disconnect between those two entities. So please join me in giving a big HGP welcome to Gordon Orians.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be back with you after hiatus. And this is a little bit different than my normal presentations, which have been science and variations on a theme of the world into which Darwin led us. This is not a talk about science at all, even though there is some science content to it. All the events I'm talking about took place in 1969, when, as one of two scientists, I visited Vietnam to look at the effects of the war. But this particular recording, I did it here in Seattle not too long ago, and it's designed to make this highly relevant as to how governments control the source of information. And when I got to Vietnam, I realized what the public was being told about what was going on and what was actually going on was totally different. And so it's in that context that I will then accompany the video, and then I'll be available for a Q&A afterwards. And I hope you'll see that this is highly relevant to the problems that we face today. So welcome to the video. One February morning in 1969, I was at my desk in my office, and the phone rang. And it was a colleague of mine, Bert Pfeiffer from the University of Montana, and we exchanged a few niceties, and then he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yes." "Would you like to go to Vietnam?" And he had been a part of an effort. A lot of scientists, myself included, felt that we weren't getting the right sort of information out from what was going on. And he had worked out with Science News, a magazine, and gotten some money that he could go to Vietnam to check out things, and they had enough money for 2 people. He wanted me to be his colleague on that trip. So I had a lot to think about. I was, I think, 37 then. I had a wife and 3 teenage kids at home. The war was going full blast, and it was not obvious that in advance that I could learn anything. But there were a number of problems, actually, because one, I was adamantly opposed to the war, and I thought it was a stupid idea. So then, could I, as a scientist, go there and be objective? And I think science is such a valuable, wonderful thing. You don't play loose with it. And at that time, there was a lot of loose being played with science. And unlike today, when it nearly all comes from the right, That was coming from the left. There's an interesting story there too. But I had to ask myself, could I put aside my opposition to the war, and when I got there, could I be actually fair and objective and true to science? Because I think science is so wonderful, you don't play around with it. And so I talked to a lot of people. I got a variety of advice. I think mostly it was, you don't really want to do this, do you? And why I eventually decided to do it, I really don't know. Even I look back on it. And I think this is rather typical of these sorts of things. We don't really deeply understand why we do some things. The brain has a lot of secrets from us. And in many ways, I thought this is something like the difference between a good novel and a bad novel. In a bad novel, the protagonists always know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. And in a good novel, they don't. So anyway, I did decide, and we went then in March for about 10 days to Vietnam. And I will give you the story there, but before we go into what we found, I want to describe how it is that you got your news, how the United States and the world got its news about what was going on, and why I found what was really going on bore no relationship, very little relationship to what was actually happening in Vietnam. So here's how you got the news. You had to be certified as representing some legitimate news organization. You got certified, and then you could go to the daily briefing, which was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they give you a handout and the briefing and to describe things. And the briefing consisted of two kinds of information. One was for the record, and you were permitted to say that they had said that. And then there was off the record, and you were not allowed to say that they said that. And if they hoped you would conclude that that was true, but you weren't allowed to say it. And if you did say it and attribute it to them, they would immediately revoke your business and be kicked out of the country. Also, there was, not only was there the things about only an invasion from the Viet Cong, the opposition in the South didn't exist, and you weren't allowed to say that they existed either. So the way it worked out, then they monitored every communication back to the United States from and if you said the wrong thing, you were kicked out. And this was a very valuable and powerful control, because this was a really posh job. You were in an air-conditioned hotel in Saigon. You could come to the briefing, write up your report, have a wonderful French dinner in the evening, and it was really quite nice. Nobody was going to give that up. And so there was pretty complete control over what went out. And that's what you heard. And when I got there and then really walked around, well, you know, that's not what I experienced. But we were able then to realize if we're just going to the briefing, we weren't going to learn anything. So we went out and we went to the University of Saigon, which had well-developed, highly educated people, educated either in France or in Britain, and they were concerned, and we tied up with a young biologist, Bui Thi Long was her name, and they really wanted to help us, took us places, took us to the rubber plantations. The rubber plantations were still going, and the French were still running the rubber plantations, and they kept those going because the rubber plantations were cash cows. And so we could go talk, and they kept a lot of record because rubber turns out to be highly sensitive to Agent Orange. And so we were able to get around. And one of the first things I learned was a standard quip that all the Viet Cong attacks occurred on Saturday night. And the reason was they were all in their offices Monday through Friday in Saigon. They left Friday night, went out into the woods, assembled, and came and had an attack wherever they're going to attack Saturday night. Then they snuck back into Saigon Saturday night or Sunday night and were at their offices Monday morning. This was just a standard quip. Everybody knew that there was a strong resistance to what we were doing in South Vietnam, but the official was that the Viet Cong didn't exist. Well, they did exist. So we were able to get around, and the scientists helped us, and the rubber research people were really interested because rubber trees are very sensitive to Agent Orange. There was a lot of damage. We could see it, and things were floating around, and a lot happened. So they were very cooperative. The scientists were very cooperative. And as I'll tell you in a bit, it turns out the military was extremely cooperative as well. But before we go there, I need to take a slight detour into botany because this is pertinent to how the herbicides worked. Modern flowering plants fall into two major groups called the monocots and the dicots. And the cot is short for cotyledon, and that's the name of the seed leaf that's in a seed. And what you have packaged in a seed is the energy resources that are needed to allow the new plant to germinate and get itself established well enough so that it could be on its own energetically. So that's the energy in which the roots are formed, the new branches and everything. Get the plant set up so that it's on its own. And so it is these seed leaves that we actually eat. When we eat a seed, what we eat are those, and it's important to understand how those worked. And in the dicots are caused because the seed, it has two components, and you can see this in a split pea. You have split the two halves, or in a peanut where you have the two halves. Those are the two cotyledons there. And those are when the seed is germinated, you put it in and it has to absorb a lot of moisture before it can sprout, all that. And then when the bean or pea plant comes out of the ground, you have these two really fat leaves there. Those are the cotyledons. And the plant uses that to grow until it's on its own. And how big the seed leaves are depends on how big the plant has to get before it is on its own. And they range from microscopic, as in orchid seeds, where you immediately establish a relationship with the fungus, to the biggest seed around that's familiar to all of us. That's the coconut. And why is the coconut so big? Well, the coconut is dispersed by water, ocean water. It floats around in the water and bumps into a beach. And it bumps into a beach, but it can't handle salt water either. And so it has to send a rhizome underneath up to the upland, and there it can establish roots and grow up. And it's got to get pretty big before it's on its own. And that's why coconuts are so big. But there's other difference between the monocots and the dicots is that the dicots grow by adding growth rings and get fatter and fatter, and we all know about that. Monocots don't have that structure, and they can't add by getting bigger and bigger. So monocots are either almost all entirely herbaceous plants like orchids. The two biggest families of flowering plants in terms of number of species are the orchids and the grasses, and those are both monocots. And most monocots then are just shrubs or lilies, things that don't get very big. So monocots are not very good at making trees. And there's one remarkable exception of monocots that made a tree, and that's palms. And palms are, as you know, rather different from all other trees around. And the differences are fundamental. A palm can't grow by adding growth rings. And so a palm comes out of the ground when it germinates, it's the size that it's going to be. And it can't add anything. So if you've looked at and wondered about palms, one of the things you may have noticed is that the trunks aren't tapered. They're the same size all the way up. Unlike dicot trees, which will be tapered. And the only place you can have any leaves and stuff is at the very top, and that is where the fruits are born. And so palms are really quite remarkable. And this is also why we can eat heart of palm. You're never going to eat heart of maple or heart of oak. So they're very, very different. And this turns out to be of some interest for what I saw in Vietnam as well. So anyway, the reason for diverging into all of this botany is that herbicides that are designed to work on dicots don't work on monocots. So they had to have several different kinds. And there were two kinds that worked on dicots, the orange and blue, and mostly they used Agent Orange, but also it was too volatile, it was blowing all over the place, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. But blue was not so volatile, and they used it a lot around buildings and roadsides and stuff where there's a problem of it not blowing around so much. And the other agent white, was used against monocots. And its primary use, it was called the Resource Denial Program, and it was used primarily against rice crops, and rice is a grass, it's a monocot. And so it was the Resource Denial Program, and it was used primarily against rice crops in northern Vietnam, and the idea was to starve them out. And they claimed that it was working because they claimed that a number of the soldiers they captured were malnourished. My understanding what happens when there's a shortage of food, it's the soldiers that get it first and everybody else waits. But anyway, that was the idea. And it was resource, they called it resource denial, and the idea was to starve them out. The other, using it against dicots, was to reduce cover. It was the cover denial program, and the idea was to expose operations so that you could see where the enemy was coming south on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and you could prevent them from hiding from you. And so this was an extensive use of agent, particularly of Agent Orange, against all of that. So it was all over the country. So we were particularly interested in determining what were the effects of the use of Agent Orange on vegetation. And we were able to do two things. As I said, the military was very cooperative, and I was able to take a trip on a Navy patrol boat down the delta of the Saigon River. Now, Saigon is a long way inland, and it's not anywhere near the Mekong. The Mekong is the great big river, and it dumps into the ocean way to the southwest of Saigon, and it has no relationship to what was the war going. It's a huge river, and it goes up through Cambodia and Laos, and that's the one you take if you want to go up to see one of the great wonders of the ancient world, Angkor Wat, which is definitely worth a visit. But the Saigon River, that's a smaller one. Its headwaters entirely within Vietnam, and that's where how Saigon got supplied with stuff, boats coming up the Saigon River, and it's small, and so covered with mangroves, and so this was very heavily defoliated because they really needed to deny cover there, and was defoliated many times. And another slight diversion into botany. Mangrove is not a technical term. A mangrove is simply any woody plant that can grow in salt water. And very few woody plants can do that because plants evolved on land just like vertebrates did, and they can't handle salt water any better than we can. And the ballad of the ancient mariner, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. Well, that's a problem not only for us, but for all vertebrates going back into the ocean. You have to deal with the salt, and the plants have to do it well. And very few plants are able to do this. And for some reason that I don't understand is that seems to be possible in woody plants only under warm conditions. So mangroves are limited to tropical and subtropical waters. No temperate zone woody plants seem to be able to handle salt water. So the mangroves are a lot of different species. There's a saltwater palm, there's a mahogany, there's all sorts. And the richest mangrove forests are in Asia, and much richer than the ones in North America or in the New World. And so they had to do that. So I was able to go on a Navy patrol boat around through the delta of the Saigon River, looking at everything, and it was amazing. There was not a live tree or woody plant in sight. The forest was completely dead for mile after mile after mile. And apparently the mangrove trees are quite susceptible to Agent Orange. And so the cover denial was very effective there. And it was a biological desert. The only birds we saw were water birds feeding on fish and stuff in the water, which was okay. The one exception was barn swallows flying around, and they were probably on their way north, and they were just flitting around. So we could see that there was just the only birds there were the ones that were using the aquatic resources. And I happen to know that these forests are very rich in birds. I had actually done a census of birds in a mangrove forest in Costa Rica, and there are lots of them there. So there should have been lots. There weren't. So that was quite remarkable. Not a woody plant alive anywhere. So it was very successful. The other part was on land, where the idea was to prevent the soldiers from being hidden. And we went around then, and I was able, and we were both able actually, to fly on a defoliation mission. And I sat between the pilot and the co-pilot in the plane and took pictures of the defoliant spreading out on the forest. Unfortunately, in the process of everything that's happened since then, I lost my slides, so I can't show anything to you. I wish I could, but I can't. But took pictures of this defoliant falling out on the forest. We were actually shot at. They missed us. That's why I'm here. But that was important to do that. And what we found out is that even though there were rules, they knew that a lot got blown around, and that the military really tried to make that so important. So they had rules. You were not supposed to defoliate if the wind was above 10 miles an hour and if the temperature was above 85 degrees. So they wanted to do it when it was not going to get blown so much. But that was the rule, but it was violated a lot. If we were told, and the pilots were very clear about this, if you had engine trouble in takeoff, you would just dump the whole thing at the end of the runway. Also, if you were, and for some reason you couldn't drop it on the target, they never wanted to land with the full load of the defoliant, so they would go out and dump the whole thing. And we also knew that actually the day that I was in it, the temperature was a bit warmer than it was supposed to be. So there was a real effort to make it less likely that it blew all over the place, but that got violated in various ways. I think that was pretty much inevitable. Now, it's interesting, the defoliation program was supposedly a program initiated by the Vietnamese, and we would respond to a request from them for them to do. We would evaluate, and we would do it at their request. That was the official. Everybody knew that the United States military really decided where to do it and why to do it, and this was another pretense. So that the stuff was blown around all over the place, and we just saw everywhere we went was evidence of damage here. And the rubber is pretty sensitive, and they were really struggling because and we took pictures and showed where even though they had never sprayed rubber trees, there was a lot of damage to rubber, and they were really struggling. So that everywhere we went, there was evidence this stuff was blowing all over the place. And there was genuine effort not to have it blown all over, but for a variety of reasons, that condition could not really be met. There was damage everywhere we went of a lot of this. That was what I'd really expected to see. But there was another twist that was related to the cooperation by the military. There was a colonel that wanted to show me something. So he took me for a ride in his helicopter, and we went out over some of the landscape, and he showed me the craters created by 500 and 750 pound bombs that they were dropping all over the countryside. And these are bombs that are designed, these are big, and they make a crater maybe 40, 50 feet across and about the same level deep, big craters filling with water. And normally those are designed against railroad buildings, factories, something like this. And there they were being spewed out all over the environment. And I was the first person to take pictures of those and show them back to world audience. Nobody had known about this before, but this is an example. This colonel, I often wonder, did he suffer from that? I never know, but he wanted to show it to me. And they don't give you information exactly how many they used, but I could figure out a pretty rough thing. They did say how many missions there were, and a mission concerned a certain number of planes, and we know how many bombs a plane would have in its hold. So I was able to say, suppose the mission was an average of 6 planes, and I came to a rough conclusion that in the prime year, which was a couple years before I was there, more than 1 million such bombs had been dropped on the coast, on the Vietnamese countryside there. More than 1 million in 1 year, and this is one of the recovery, because that's going to take a long time to go back. So these pictures were quite unexpected, and that was one of the things that in our report that I was able to really point out. So it's a slightly aside here that was of interest, that shortly after we got back, I had learned that the military wanted to find out, would Agent Orange work on tropical trees? Before we start spraying them all over on tropical trees, will it really kill them? So they wanted to try it out, and I learned that they had done it in the Ukiah National Forest in the mountains of northeastern Puerto Rico. And I happened to go in a couple months after coming back from Vietnam to Puerto Rico to give a lecture, and I was able to make contact with someone from the forest who was able to take me to where they had done the defoliation experiments. And we were able to walk in there and spend overnight. And it was done by helicopter. We knew exactly. It was hard to find it because nobody had gone back again. They got the answer that they wanted. Will Agent Orange work on tropical trees? And the answer is yes, it will. And they never went back, and so nobody had been there for a long time. It was really hard to find the places, but they had planted mahogany and Caribbean pine trees. They were growing just fine, as we would expect, but nobody had ever come back, and the Army was simply not interested in how well would the forest recover from that. They got the answer they wanted. Okay, so we went back to the United States and wrote an article, a major report, a scientific report of what we had found and our conclusions and recommendations, etc. And I sent the manuscript off to then what was the leading, and still is the leading scientific journal in the United States, Science. It's a weekly publication, and I submitted it to Science because I wanted to go to the best magazine publication in the United States. And after a while, I got the review back, and it was only one. Normally you get several reviews. There was only one review. It was a scathingly negative review, and it was accompanied by an acceptance letter. An acceptance letter. Normally a review like that would have just absolutely killed it. So I was really puzzled by this, and thought a lot about it, and I don't know the full answer, but one is that the review was really obviously ill-informed. The guy said, did you have any reason to expect there would be birds in the mangroves? Well, yes, there are birds all over in the mangroves, if they're alive. And he had other stuff. But also, I just wonder, could they have found anybody else to review it? Who else would have known what we know and would have been able to judge whether we were saying was accurate or not? They might not have been able to find anybody else. I don't know. But there's also the possibility that maybe some people in the editorial board of Science really wanted the American public to know this and knew that we had written a scientifically acceptable article and really wanted it to be published. So it was. So the May 1st, 1970 issue of Science has our article in it. The cover is not my picture, but it's of defoliation. But the full report of our study is there, and so it was there published in the leading scientific journal of the day. I'm still puzzled. You wonder what all of the politics were on this, but that's what it was. In addition to that, I got involved in other publications that are more political nature, and here's one. And here's a book, Harvest of Death, in which Bert and I have a chapter, and I did a lot of talking around. I have a picture that I took on the Navy patrol boat of me with a jacket and a cap and the flag behind. And I thought I'll use this in case I ever want to run for office. But I decided that wasn't what I was any good at, so I never ran for office, never used it. So this was, of course, right at the time the opposition to the war was really heating up. It was really terrible. But reflecting on this, I'm very pleased that I went. In retrospect, that I was able to show that I could be true to science, even when I'm reporting on something where I had strong feelings about the war. But it was quite easy to do. It was so terrible. There was so much to see that you didn't have to play loose with it. And I just, science is so wonderful. You just don't play loose with it. It's very much like, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, science is the worst way to figure out how the world works, except for other way that has been tried from time to time. And the sad situation, of course, is today. It's worse, I think, than it's ever been. There's anti-science. There's total rejection of science by one major political party in the United States. They don't believe in science, and I sit there wondering, I thought it was bad the time I was there and went to Vietnam. It looks to me even worse today. And whether our article and work had anything to do with hastening the end of the war, we'll never really know. But you never really know these sorts of things. You just do what you have to do. And let me end by just saying, when will we ever learn? When will we ever learn?
Thank you very much, Gordon, for that edifying presentation, sharing the first-hand anecdotes, and also providing us with the contemporary relevance. We'll now turn it over to the Q&A session. Okay, so Joyce's question was, the disinformation during the Vietnam War was coming from the left. Do you want to tell us that story?
The opposition was coming from the left, which was the question, I think, and that was very much, it was science for the people. It was led by a bunch of scientists, two major scientists at Harvard University, Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin, and they were very much anti-science because they felt everything was political, and they didn't want the story to be told the way it was. So it's rather interesting that there was and this is the time when they insulted Ed Wilson and all sorts of stuff went on. And this is hard to remember now that the big anti-science thing at that time was coming from left-wing politicians and left-wing scientists. It's totally reversed now, and it's always coming from the right and the religious right, and it's almost always associated with fundamental religious beliefs today. But it's a very interesting story about the anti-science of the left that was very dominant then, and it was centered in Harvard, which always seems to be in the news. And there's more I could tell about it, but that's what it was. And you all know that Ed Wilson was insulted and had tomatoes thrown at him and all sorts of things because he had dared to assume that there was some evolutionary basis for our reactions to things. It is a very interesting story. It's worth much more than we can give it now.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Gordon. Can we go to question number 2 at the Friendly House? Go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, don't need a microphone.
No, you don't.
Yeah, Gordon, Steve Hamaker, Vancouver, Washington. I served during 67, 68 in a medevac hospital, and we didn't know or appreciate how much your talk impacted our lives at 18 or 19. As far as the eye could see outside the perimeter, in fact, as far as about a mile away, where they had the biggest ammunition dump, 3 of them, in all of Vietnam, was cleared with Agent Orange. And I know that it started a year or 2 before I served there, so it was planned to spray this stuff before we really got deep into the war. But if I can refer to an article, what I'm saying in essence is this: I need, at my age, to understand more of what you know, and I'm just the tip of the iceberg. I was in a support position, and there are a lot of guys that I saw that were out there in combat, but that even now would love to hear you speak. So think about what you're doing for the organization and have been doing the organization. But on this topic, we want more. Here I'm going to cite a very short paragraph and want you to read your feedback from the New York Times in February 17th of 2025. New York Times: the end of amends for a toxic offensive. It's one paragraph. By the way, I was only just a few miles away from here. Give me a second. Benoit Air Base, about 20 miles out of Ho Chi Minh, formerly in Saigon, is a tougher challenge to clean up. 10-year, $450 million project involving the treatment of enough contaminated earth to fill 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Wow. The United States has contributed more than 160 so far million out of a pledged 300 million under USDA. The article starts out talking about these loans under USDA for the indigenous people, 150,000 children deformed, of which they center on one in this program, in this article. She got the education, higher education. She can't get the computer that allows her to make money.
Well,
We know what's happening to USDA, but we left a huge sore in this country. And I want to know what the research is saying that the Vietnamese have done for us, although they may still need the money from us. But how the hell are they able to entertain us when we go to Vietnam, we go to Hanoi, warmly received, and go in their hotels that are inexpensive and luxurious, but almost as if that generation has no concept of the damage we've done in their lives just in the countryside. Go ahead.
I think they actually did. But it's like I go and work in the northern Great Plains, and the Indians there will actually come and hug me. They know damn well what we did to them. But I think there is a recognition that if you're going to move forward, you got to forgive some of this. But one thing I do want to mention about Agent Orange itself is not very toxic. You can drink it. It's a plant growth hormone. But in the manufacturing of Agent Orange, there's a contaminant, dioxin, which is deadly poisonous. And it's evident that the deformations, the things that have been caused by it, come from dioxin, the defoliant. And there is a study that has been going on out of Vancouver, BC, because the Vietnamese didn't trust the Americans to do anything properly, looking in on this. And I haven't kept up with the latest on it, but they did find a lot of evidence of poisoning and things like that in areas where the concentrations were very high. But again, it's because of a contaminant, not because of Agent Orange itself. But back to the thing, when we've done things to people in the past, they're able, amazingly, as I said, when I get hugged by an Indian on the northern Great Plains, it sort of really stuns me because I know what we did to them and they know what we did to them. But somehow they're willing to move on. I hope we can learn from them.
Else a chance.
Just Agent Orange has, they sprayed Agent Orange that had that dioxin in it, and they also sprayed Agent Orange that did not have dioxin in it.
Pardon?
So the question, I'll do it, Steve. The question for a clarification is, would they spray Agent Orange that had dioxin in it and Agent Orange that did not have dioxin in it?
It always had some dioxin because that was an inevitable thing of the manufacturing process. There was a small amount of it, but I don't think there was any place where we could look at it where they sprayed it and there was no dioxin in it at all.
Okay.
That was everywhere.
Okay, let's take our first question on Zoom, which is
places where an awful lot was done where the damage, health damage showed up.
Okay, thank you. Let's take our first question on Zoom, which comes from Suzanne. She says, you lost some of your photos. Were you able to recover them?
No, I've not been able to recover them. I don't know what happened to them. I've done a lot of downsizing and changing and various those things. And in the process of getting to finally be in a retirement center, which I now live. And that's just among the things. There's a lot of other things I lost, but that's just it, which I highly agree. A couple of the photographs, of course, are in the publication in Science and elsewhere, were pictures of the foliants going out and various other things in the mangroves. So there are pictures I have published in those publications, which show some of it. But I think that gives you the general idea. But they're, as far as I can tell, they're forever gone.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's go to question number 3 at the friendly house.
Okay, I made a trip a couple years ago to Saigon, and one of my stops there was the War Remembrance Museum. And I took a lot of photos from there. And as a matter of fact, I have them on my laptop right now. And I just looked up the photos I was willing to stomach taking of the after effects or the birth defects caused by Agent Orange contamination. And they're not pretty. I was going to say, if you're going to give another talk later on covering this, if you like, I can send the relevant ones to you.
I think if you want to get on this, you ought to get this Vancouver company that's doing all the active work. And I forget their name now, but you can. It's probably recoverable, and they have documented this and gone in, and it's very detailed. And yes, there are these deformities, and they came as a result of the dioxin contamination, and in places where especially large amount of stuff were spilled or dependent. So it was localized, but it was that doesn't mean it wasn't bad. But I'm not the person that can give you that talk. Maybe I can help you find the name of the Vancouver company that was doing it. Whether they're still doing it, I don't know, because I've lost contact.
Yeah, that could be helpful, and we'll definitely follow up with you on that. Let's go to question number 4 at the friendly house.
Gordon, since you were willing to talk and name names about people in science and their involvement in this thing, I'll ask you about 2 guys I kind of had some experience with. The first was Lee DeBridge, who was president of Caltech and was one of the people who was very friendly to Ronald Reagan, gave him platform and connected with him. And he left Caltech to become Richard Nixon's science advisor. And the other one was Harold Brown, who was LBJ's Secretary of the Air Force, who said bomb them back to the Stone Age, who, when LBJ left office, became president of Caltech. And I was a student there at that time, so I had encounters with those guys. So tell me about them and which one was better or which one was worse.
Well, it turns out that unfortunately, scientists are quite manipulatable, because scientists depend upon federal money for the research to do the stuff we want to do. So we know who lays the golden egg. And so there's a long history of scientists who've been willing to say false things, knowingly false things, or been able to convince themselves that what is really true isn't true and that there's an alternative. So I think some of the scientists today that do profess to believe in what Kennedy Jr. is saying about vaccines and stuff may actually believe what they're saying. I don't know, but when the Star Wars came out and Reagan proposed it, it was all sort of a vast amount of money. I watched my colleagues at the University of Washington lining up to get grants and talking to them. They all believed it was nonsense, but they could get some money to do research. So unfortunately, dedication to science and scientific truth often gets modified when we know where the money is coming from. And we could talk about that for a long way, but unfortunately, scientists are easily manipulated.
Okay, very good.
Sorry about that.
Let's go to question number 5 at the front of the house.
Gordon, I'm very impressed that you were able to publish an article in Science after only 10 days in a completely different country that you'd never visited before. Was your article mainly qualitative as opposed to quantitative?
There were both qualitative and quantitative things. I made a quantitative estimate, as I told you, about the number of bombs that were dropped. I made a couple of quantitative things about the destruction in the mangroves. There was a lot of it, however, was qualitative, showing that the degree to which it was blowing all over the countryside. And it was impossible to be quantitative about that, but we could go and show the damage to the leaves, show the damage here. I took all sorts of pictures of damaged leaves, and you could see it was coming from, you could see which way the wind was blowing. But an awful lot of this, we made an assessment, and whereas there were a few quantitative things in it, inevitably, an awful lot of it was qualitative. Having said that, that's all you needed to know. The qualitative estimate was quite good.
Excellent. Let's go to question number 6 at the front of the house.
Helen, I remember being a young child and listening on the radio during the Vietnam War days of 100 people, 100 Viet Cong had been, this was every morning before going to school. 100 Viet Cong had been killed today or yesterday, and 2 Americans. And I remember thinking, that is, even as a little girl, that is such garbage. And I'm curious if you think that this was the beginning, the Vietnam War and the lies that were placed on us, if that was the beginning of Americans stopping trusting the government. You know, that they lie and they're telling us a story, and they continue to do that.
I think that the Vietnam War and the reporting on it was very important in the public recognizing how much the government lied and tried to manipulate you. It's not the first time this has happened, of course. If you go back in history, governments have done this for a long time. But I think the Vietnam War itself was very much of a turning point in the recognition of this and the kind of demonstrations that went on, which were unprecedented with something like that. I also felt very sorry for the soldiers who came back from the war, and they were vilified because the war was so unpopular. And I thought, these poor soldiers, they went there, they weren't given an option. They thought they were doing okay, and we should have been nice to them when they came back, whatever we thought about the war and their role in it. But it was extremely complicated. I participated in some of the demonstrations afterward, but the whole country was in a big turmoil after the war, and turmoil in ending it, which I think the political opposition actually ended the war. The military, or the military was, well, they had no choice because Saigon fell. I mean, and the pictures of the last people who helped us trying to get on a plane off of the roof is one of the photographs I'll always remember. But you know, there's another story in Afghanistan. There were people that helped us, and we left them stranded. So we're not very good at rewarding the people who risked their lives to help us. And we, unfortunately, what we did in Vietnam is being repeated even now. So it's a sad story. I could give you better news.
Thank you for that, Gordon. Let's go to question number 7 at the front of the house.
Hey, Gordon, I realize you were only there for a relatively short time, but did you have an opportunity to get to know any Vietnamese people and get any idea of how they felt about the war?
Well, I was able to assess these scientists, and particularly the one woman scientist that took us around. They had very strong, but they were in a situation they had to be very careful about what they said. And they didn't reveal their own opinions all that much. They helped us out, and they let us know by helping us what they really felt. But I didn't try to push them to say anything because I figured that would just put them in an uncomfortable position. And they were doing what they needed to do to help me. The military was much more forthcoming. This was a political war. They didn't want to be there. They had the ability. They could have bombed Hanoi in one day and ended it, but politically that was unacceptable. And so the military felt, here we are. We've got this power. We could finish it if you wanted us to finish it. So they were very happy to talk about it. So the only people, and there was a small number, of course, whose opinions I was able to assess, and they were the military. The civilians, they helped us. They didn't want to say anything more than that.
Thanks. Thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions from the friendly house or over Zoom? Go ahead, Joyce.
Gordon, do you think it helped when you got your article published? You wondered why they published, even though you had a bad review. At that point in your career, have you built up a great deal of credibility in the scientific field anyway? Was that part of it, do you think?
Well, I can only guess, you know. All I can tell you is that normally you would expect, if you had a review like that, that was the end. But also it was unusual, there was only one review. And as I indicated in the talk, I wasn't sure how they could get more reviews. Who was going to do it? Who knew what we knew? Who was available that could have done it? And so I think the editors of Science were in a quandary, and I can only guess at what their motivations was, but I think they must have really felt, obviously this was a good scientific paper, that we hadn't played loose with anything. You could look at it and you could tell this was two scientists reporting on science, and they could see it. And I think they figured the public needs to know this, but that's forever lost. I never got to talk to them. This is all speculation on my part, but I think it's pretty reasonably informed speculation.
Very good. Okay, go ahead, Anne.
What was the date of the article in Science Magazine? Because I'm looking at the archives and I'm not finding the picture that you were showing. So
May 1st, 1970.
1970. Oh, I was looking at 71. Okay.
May 1st, 1970.
Thank you very much.
Because it was 1970 when it was finally published. It's May 1st, 1970.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to
find it? You should be able to find it.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Go ahead, Stephen.
Steve Hamaker again. The son of McNamara wrote a book in 23 called Because Our Fathers Lied. And in some ways, it's a very, for the neophyte like myself, slow, drawn out, because the emphasis of the book for me was really his relationship he had with his father. And in it, he says over and over again, McNamara dying in 1992, having put out a book himself, A Broken Man, he says, I never had one conversation with McNamara. I was my father, even though here's a man of two different lives, head of the World Bank and 8 years in administration. I guess I'm asking you, how is it that he could see clearly and we, 300 million strong, could not see more through this man's actions, which is the administration's.
Well, this is a difficult one to answer. Why do we perceive what we do perceive? Why are we so slow in recognizing something? And mostly I had a very loving father. I got into bird watching because of my father, but we lived in totally different worlds. He was a minister, and Protestant minister, and I left the fold and became 101% secular. I still admired him. He was a wonderful man. He got me into birds. He was my most important buddy, but we just lived in a totally different world. And the way the world is changing, most fathers and sons lived in totally different worlds today. This is, I think, a modern feature of how fast things are changing. Nonetheless, we have these powerful parent-offspring bonds that tie people, but these are difficult times for those bonds because the generations today are really living in different worlds.
Yep, it's a theme that's come up quite frequently over the past few weeks and during our humanist presentations. With that, I think we're out of questions. So let's give Gordon a big thanks for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Gordon. It was extremely educational, and it's a topic that means a lot to me because I've
worked in Vietnam before and worked with children who have special needs. So thank you once again so much.